The last echoes of the goblin's curses still rang in my ears as I strode away from the containment facility. The satisfaction of a job well done warming me against the chill night air. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the fabric heavy with the remnants of magic and grime from the encounter. It's never clean work dealing with goblins, but it's necessary. People don't understand what lurks in the shadows, and frankly, they're better off that way. I was halfway to my beat-up Chevy when my phone buzzed. I didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Only a handful of people had this number, and most of them were the kind who wouldn't call unless the world was about to end. Or at least, someone's world. "More," I answered, the phone wedged between my shoulder and ear as I fished for my keys. "Lucas, it's Marlene," came the reply, her voice as crisp and businesslike as always. Marlene was my contact at the agency, the one who dealt with all the bureaucratic bullshit so I could focus on the monsters. "What's the crisis this time?" I asked, unlocking my car and sliding into the driver's seat. The interior smelled like fast food and old leather, a comforting scent. "We've got a situation, a big one. Need you back at HQ ASAP." I started the engine, the car rumbling to life with a familiar grumble. "Give me the gist." "It's a gargoyle, in the city. It's been taking people. And what's left of them? Jesus, Lucas. It's a fucking mess." A gargoyle. That was bad news. Most folks think of them as stone statues perched on old buildings, but the real deal? They're a whole different level of nightmare. "I'm on my way," I said, already pulling out of the parking lot. I could feel the adrenaline starting to pump through my veins. This was what I lived for. The hunt, the challenge. Goblins were child's play compared to a gargoyle. The drive back was a blur of streetlights and shadows. My mind raced with every piece of lore and intel I had on gargoyles. They were rare, notoriously hard to kill, and smart. Damn smart. The thought of it preying on people, turning them into whatever gruesome state Marlene couldn't bring herself to describe, it set my teeth on edge. I pulled up to my apartment, a modest building that looked like it had seen better days. It suited me fine. Luxury was a liability in my line of work. As I climbed out of the car, I noticed an envelope tucked under my door. "HQ's getting fancy with their summons," I muttered, tearing it open. Inside was a brief, stark description of the situation and an address where the most recent attacks had occurred. "Shit," I whispered to myself. The address was in the heart of the city, a place teeming with potential victims. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a race against time. I grabbed my gear, a mix of ancient relics and modern weaponry, all tailored to my very particular career. As I loaded up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be one of those cases that stayed with you, the kind that reminded you why monsters were feared in the first place. Locking up, I headed back to my car, the weight of the task ahead settling in my stomach like lead. This gargoyle was a killer, a monster in the truest sense of the word. And it was my job to stop it. "Game on, you winged bastard," I said to the night, my voice a low growl of determination. "Let's see how you like being the prey for a change." The city was a different beast at night, its towering buildings like silent sentinels watching over the restless streets below. As I drove through, the usual vibrancy felt muted, suffocated under a blanket of fear. News about the gargoyle had spread fast, and it showed. People hurried along, casting nervous glances at the sky, jumping at shadows. Can't blame them. When a real monster comes to town, it changes everything. I parked my Chevy in a shadowed alley near the last known attack site. The area was cordoned off with police tape, flapping lazily in the night breeze. Cops were still around, their cruisers idling at the curb, lights casting an eerie glow on the scene. I stayed in the shadows, observing. No need to attract attention. Not yet. The first night was always about reconnaissance, learning the lay of the land, understanding your enemy. I slipped through the alleyways, sticking to the darkness, eyes and ears open for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl echoing off the concrete walls. My hand instinctively went to the weapon holstered at my side. I moved towards the sound, silent as a shadow, until I caught a glimpse of it. The gargoyle, perched atop a building, its stone-like wings folded against its back, its eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. A shiver ran down my spine, not fear, but anticipation. This was the dance I knew, the dance with death. But as quickly as it appeared, the creature vanished, melting into the night, a game of cat and mouse, except this mouse had claws and a taste for human flesh. I spent the rest of the night patrolling the area, but the gargoyle was a no-show. As dawn approached, I retreated to a dingy motel room I'd booked under a fake name. Can't hunt effectively if you're dead on your feet. The next day, I was back on the streets, posing as a journalist, camera in hand. I wanted to get a look at the crime scene in the daylight, see what the gargoyle had left behind. The sight was a mess. Blood, broken glass, and a sense of utter violation. I snapped pictures, playing my part, but my mind was elsewhere, piecing together the clues. The gargoyle was strong, brutal, but not mindless. It had patterns, habits, and I was going to learn them. My investigation led me to a witness, a homeless guy who'd been sleeping in an alley nearby. He talked of a demon with wings, snatching a woman right off the street, his eyes wide with terror. He described the sound of her screams, the horrific sight of the gargoyle ascending into the night sky with its prey. His story was a patchwork of fear and shock, but it was genuine. I gave him a few bucks for his trouble. It wasn't much, but it was all I could spare. This job doesn't come with a pension plan. As night fell again, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was it, the hunt. I was back in the alley, my senses heightened, every nerve in my body tingling with anticipation. The gargoyle was out there, somewhere, and tonight I was going to find it. "Come on, you son of a bitch," I whispered into the dark. "Let's see what you're made of." The city at night was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, and I was its reluctant guide, threading my way through the darkness in search of a creature that was both hunter and hunted. My mind played over every detail I'd gathered about the gargoyle, its patterns, its brutal efficiency, its seeming enjoyment of the terror it instilled. But understanding a monster and facing it down are two very different things. Tonight, I was setting a trap. Based on its previous attacks, I predicted its next hunting ground, a park wedged between high-rise apartments, dimly lit and deserted by night. A perfect spot for a gargoyle to hunt. And a perfect spot for me to turn the tables. I set up my equipment, a blend of technology and old-world traps. The plan was simple: lure it in, incapacitate it, then finish the job. I wasn't naive enough to think it'd be easy, but I had a few tricks up my sleeve. I'd learned a thing or two in my years of hunting things that go bump in the night. I waited, perched on a rooftop, my eyes scanning the darkness. Hours ticked by, the tension building like a coiled spring. Then, it happened. Wings cutting through the night air, a silhouette against the moon. The gargoyle landed in the park, its eyes scanning, ever vigilant. I held my breath, waiting for the right moment. But as I prepared to spring my trap, the creature paused, its head tilting as if sensing something amiss. In a split second, it took to the air again, vanishing into the night. The trap had failed. "Shit," I cursed under my breath. This was not how I'd planned it. I had underestimated it. It wasn't just some mindless beast. It was cunning, adaptable. The next few hours were a blur of shadows in motion as I chased the gargoyle through the city. It was a game of cat and mouse, but the roles kept shifting. One moment I was the hunter, the next the hunted. The city's skyline became our battleground, and I pushed myself to the limits, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, always a step behind. It was during one such leap that I misjudged a landing, my foot slipping on the wet roof. I managed to catch myself, but not without sending a cascade of debris clattering to the street below. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night, and for a moment, everything went still. Then I heard it. The low, mocking growl of the gargoyle from somewhere above. It had been watching, biding its time, learning just as I was. This was no mere beast. This was something else, something smarter, something deadlier. I retreated, using every trick I knew to cover my tracks, to throw it off my scent. But the encounter left me with a chilling realization. I was not the only one hunting, and this gargoyle was not going to be easy prey. As dawn approached, I found myself back at the motel, my body aching, my mind racing. I needed a new plan, a better plan. I had faced many monsters in my time, but this one was different. It was a killer, a predator, a creature of the night that had made the city its hunting ground. The gray light of dawn filtered through the grimy motel window, painting the room in washed-out hues. I sat at the edge of the bed, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts, plans, and a gnawing sense of frustration. The gargoyle was more than just a predator. It was a puzzle, a shadowy enigma that eluded every attempt to corner it. I needed answers, and I knew brute force wouldn't cut it. I needed to delve deeper into the lore, to understand the creature's origin and motivations. Rubbing the stubble on my chin, I decided my first stop would be the local library. Gargoyles weren't just monsters. They were steeped in history, in art, in culture. Somewhere in that trove of knowledge lay the key to defeating this creature. The library was a grand old building, its walls lined with more books than I could read in a lifetime. I buried myself in dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts, piecing together the history of gargoyles. They were guardians, protectors, but something had turned this one into a hunter of men. Hours turned into a blur as I scoured through the pages. Then, amidst the folklore and conjecture, I found it. A legend about a gargoyle brought to life by a sorcerer, its purpose warped and twisted. It spoke of a ritual, a binding that tethered the creature to our realm, and crucially, a way to break that bond. I gathered the books, my mind racing with the implications of this discovery. But knowledge wasn't enough. I needed an edge. That's when I remembered an old contact, a professor of medieval history and folklore who'd helped me out on a few cases in the past. Maybe he had something more, something I'd missed. The professor, a wiry man with a shock of white hair, met me at a local diner. Over cups of bitter coffee, I laid out what I'd found. His eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and concern as he listened. "You're dealing with something ancient, Lucas," he said, his voice low. "This gargoyle, it's bound by old magic, the kind that doesn't play by our rules." My mind replayed the showdown in vivid detail. The gargoyle, a creature of stone and malice, had descended upon me like a wrathful deity, its wings unfurling with a sound like cracking thunder. Its eyes, glowing like molten gold, had fixed on me with a hatred that was almost palpable. Each swipe of its taloned hands had been a brush with death, its movements a blur of speed and lethal intent. But amidst the chaos, I had stood my ground, the words of the ancient ritual flowing from my lips in a steady stream. The air had crackled with energy, the edges of reality seeming to fray and warp. The gargoyle's roars had filled the space, a sound that spoke of an age when such creatures ruled the skies unchallenged. As I had spoken the final words of the ritual, a blinding light had enveloped the gargoyle, its form writhing in agony. I had watched as the creature had become translucent, its form dissolving into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, it had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a faint echo and a sense of profound emptiness. Now, as I walked through the silent streets, the city seemed to slumber peacefully, unaware of the nightmare that had preyed upon it. The gargoyle's reign of terror was over, but the memories of those it had taken lingered like ghosts in the night. I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for those lost souls, their lives cut short by a creature from another world. I reported back to the agency, my report a mere formality in the grand scheme of things. The debriefing was a blur of questions and answers, but behind the bureaucratic veneer, I could sense a current of unease. The existence of such creatures raised questions that had no easy answers, and I knew that my role as a hunter was more important than ever. The city gradually returned to its usual rhythm, the terror of the gargoyle fading into urban legend. But for me, the hunt had left its mark. I found myself more vigilant, more aware of the shadows that lay just beyond the reach of the city lights. The gargoyle was gone, but there were other monsters out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for their chance to emerge. And I would be ready. My experience had honed my skills, sharpened my instincts. I was a hunter, a guardian against the night. As I sat on the rooftop of my apartment building, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of purpose settle over me. The world was full of mysteries and dangers, and I was one of the few who stood between them and the unsuspecting public. The phone buzzed in my pocket, a new message from the agency. Another case, another monster to hunt. I stood up, feeling the familiar weight of my gear, a comforting presence. The sun climbed higher, its rays cutting through the remnants of the night. I looked out over the city, my city, and made a silent vow. I would protect it, no matter what horrors the darkness held. And with that firmly in my heart, I stepped into the light of a new day, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.